Americans who have lived in Russia. What surprised you about the country? What stereotypes turned out to be false?
Turns out, most Russians don't really care about America that much. Either they're indifferent, or they actually speak about it positively. Wait! Are you telling me there are countries where people don't talk about the greatness of America 24/7? I studied in Russia for 6 months. Many Russians living in big cities are very well educated and work a lot. I'd say even more than your average American. The older generation who grew up in the USSR are even more educated. But at the same time, they can be pretty superstitious and have some outdated views on gender roles and certain aspects of biology. They don't have a lot of money, so most people rarely travel outside the country. As a result, their view of the world is often limited to Russia and nearby regions. A lot of them aren't particularly supportive of their government and don't care much about politics because ordinary people there feel completely powerless in that sphere. Mostly they just focus on their everyday lives. Not everyone drinks vodka 24/7. Sure, there are plenty of heavy drinkers, but there are just as many hardworking folks as in the US. And when Russians drink, they don't say na zdorovia, they say za zdorovia. Winters aren't actually that brutal. It's the lack of smiles that really makes the country feel colder. It's funny how many people in this thread seem surprised that Russians are nice people. Do people still really believe in the evil Russian stereotype? I'm American myself, but I never bought into that. In general, no matter where you go, most regular people are decent, because surprise, they're just like us. But people in power? They're usually the real assholes. Not that surprising, considering for the past 60 years, every Russian in an American movie has been a villain. If you hear a Russian accent, you can bet the character's a bad guy. I once traveled across Russia by train and spent a few days in Moscow. One time in Moldova, a Russian guy helped me fix my motorcycle. Before I left home, people told me, Russians are like coconuts and Americans are like peaches. Russians have a hard outer shell that's tough to crack, but once you do, they really open up, invite you into their homes, and treat you like family. Americans are the opposite. All warm and fuzzy on the outside, but guarded deep down. You'll be friends right away, but when it comes to real personal stuff, they keep you at arm's length. That Russian guy who helped me said, an American will smile and chat with you just as long as you're on the other side of his fence, but he won't invite you over.
Relatable. I'm totally like that myself, and I don't even know why. Americans still think Russians spend 2 hours a day standing in line for potatoes and vodka, knee-deep in snow wearing fur hats, but that's not quite accurate. They stand in line for 3 hours. Americans don't realize that Russia has racial issues too. Russia is just as diverse as the US. Out east, there are people who look Korean, and in Central Asia, you have folks from former Soviet republics. They've got their own tensions, just like we do here. I lived in Moscow back in 2007 while studying at university. I can't speak for all of Russia. It's a massive country with tons of different people and outlooks on life. But I can tell you about Moscow. For the most part, a lot of our assumptions about Russians aren't completely off. Many people do drink a lot and they admire strong leaders, even when those leaders strip away some of their freedoms or rights. But we're wrong when we think all Russians are cold and miserable. Sure, it's true that on the street, they won't make eye contact, they won't smile at strangers, and they definitely won't walk up and randomly pet your dog, which for someone from Texas like me is kind of jarring. Where I'm from, not smiling at someone in passing is considered rude. So yeah, that whole grumpy and unapproachable in public stereotype, there's definitely truth to it. But here's the thing, even though a lot of Russians enjoy drinking, it's not like everyone's a drunk. And I noticed a clear generational shift. People in their 20s to 40s are drinking less and focusing more on careers. As for the idea that Russians hate Americans, honestly, I found the opposite to be true. They seem to love our culture and the stuff that comes out of the American entertainment industry. You wouldn't believe how many times this guy Dima came up to me at university asking me to help him understand American rap lyrics. I spent 3 months in Moscow. Right before I left, I went to my pharmacist to stock up on meds. When I told him I was heading to Russia, he looked shocked and said, "You're gonna get kidnapped. Those guys run around with AKs in the streets." I tried to convince him that it wasn't like that and that I'd be fine, but he didn't really believe me. Ironically, less than a year after I got back, some guys robbed his pharmacy and killed him. The police never caught them. Man, I'm scared I'm gonna find out that not all Russian girls are beautiful. No worries, dude, they really are stunning. I go to Russia every summer. Modern Russia feels pretty Western now. They've got Western food, fast food chains, stores, all the stuff we're used to in the States, and they're no longer trying to hide anything from tourists. I've been to different parts of Russia, and yeah, it's not as polished as Moscow or St. Petersburg. Back in Soviet times, a tourist like me probably wouldn't have been allowed to see any of that. And the food? Absolutely incredible. And way healthier than what we eat in America. I've got some serious digestive issues and can't eat a lot of American food. When I moved to Russia, I figured I'd have to stick to a strict diet. Turns out, I could eat almost everything Russian and feel totally fine. I haven't felt that good in a long time. Sometimes I seriously think about moving back to Russia just for the food. Most Americans probably don't know that in Russia you can't buy alcohol in stores after 11 p.m. You can still get a drink at a bar or restaurant just fine, but in a regular shop, no beer, no wine, nothing. There's also this idea that Russia is always gloomy and depressing. But in late spring and early summer, St. Petersburg looks absolutely stunning. The white nights more than make up for the fact that in December, the sun doesn't rise until almost 10 in the morning. I first came to Moscow from Northern California back in 2013, and in the end, I decided to stay for who knows how long. What can I say? If you overlook the lousy customer service, the lack of smiles, and the barely there winter sun, I actually like it here. Russians really like American culture. They watch tons of Hollywood movies and are starting to get into things like Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Black Friday. I actually enjoy explaining our traditions to them. It's kind of fun. Also, there's this absolutely massive McDonald's in Moscow. If I'm not mistaken, it has something like 27 registers, and it's always packed. As for vodka, younger people either don't like it or associate it with bad memories, so they go for other drinks instead. Girls tend to prefer fruity cocktails and wine, while guys usually drink whiskey or scotch, or sometimes don't drink at all. Russians struck me as incredibly kind and genuine. If you ask someone for help, they'll go out of their way to do whatever they can. One guy fixed my computer, and I barely even knew him. Later, when I told him I wanted to learn SolidWorks, he offered to help me over Skype. Another time, I met a guy at a conference, and that same day, he gave me a ride home even though I lived on the other side of the city. It was totally out of his way, and he still spent several hours just helping me out. I even had a professor at my university who once invited me to work with him on a small project. In the US, most professors would have seen that as a waste of their time. In general, I've noticed that Russian teachers seem to take more responsibility for their students' success than teachers in the States. I've been living here for about 4 years now. As for politics, Russians don't worship Putin, but many of them, especially men, do support him. I don't really talk politics much, so maybe there are reasons for that I just don't fully understand. One thing's for sure, the information shown on American and Russian media is completely different. On Russian TV, Putin is portrayed as a strong but also kind and approachable leader, which is obviously at odds with how Americans usually see him. I also lived in Russia for 2 months, mostly in Moscow, though I'm not American, I'm Australian. Overall, the food there turned out to be way better than I expected. You can get a really tasty cheap meal at places like Taramak. Public transport is way more convenient than in Sydney. The metro is just awesome. People are much nicer than I expected. But I never want to ride in a car with Russians again. I can confirm the stereotype that Russians are terrible drivers. There aren't that many gopniks, but they are annoying. Russian apartments aren't actually that tiny. They're perfectly fine. It's a totally normal country, and it's not falling apart like we're often told on TV. But one thing that really is true, they have a very corrupt police force, and they don't go easy on anyone. Also, whenever people found out I wasn't from the US but from Australia, they treated me much more kindly. I give Russia a solid 5 out of 7. My girlfriend and I spent 3 years teaching English in Ufa. Turns out Russians aren't that big and tough. I'm 5 feet 8, 173 centimeters, and I actually felt kind of tall. There are a lot of alcohol restrictions. After 10 p.m., you can't buy anything. By the way, I met a ton of Russians who don't drink at all. And no, it's not just because I was in a Muslim majority region. I know plenty of Muslims who do drink. Drinking and driving is strictly forbidden. So if someone comes over to your place and you offer them a beer, chances are they'll turn it down. Russia isn't all that dangerous. In my 18 months there, I didn't have a single issue. No trouble with the police, and I never had to bribe anyone. That's all I can recall off the top of my head. If you're curious to know what's true or not true about Russia, feel free to ask. Happy to share. Oh, and yeah, I dated Russian girls while I was there. They're incredibly beautiful and sweet, but it's not that easy to connect with the local population. You do feel like a lost foreigner. Shame that Russian is such a tough language to learn. Tried borscht. Super tasty. St. Petersburg is an awesome city. I'd love to go back there again. Sochi is an okay city too, but the beaches there are honestly terrible. Russians really like European culture and are happy to interact with Americans. If you're an American living in Russia, you're something new and interesting to them. People are eager to improve their English and are happy to chat with Americans in English because they rarely get to meet native speakers. While I was in Russia, I got thanked a million times for coming and asked a million times why on earth I was even interested in Russia. One thing that really surprised me as an American was the deep sense of connection Russians have with their history and culture, and how deeply they understand it. Like, sure, I read some classics in school too, but they didn't really overlap with my everyday life in any meaningful way. I also noticed that Russians don't really take pride in their politics. And on top of that, they don't seem arrogant at all and rarely consider themselves particularly successful. And unlike American-style individualism, a Russian person's life really revolves around their family and close circle. Thanks so much for watching.